the Islamists glorify Muhammad's conquests, and they want to continue those conquests. They glorify the treatment that Muhammad meted out to the Jews when he massacred them, and they want to repeat these things.
I'm frankly ashamed of the things that have happened in my country, because this was such a wonderfully safe place for Jews to come for so long, particularly after the Holocaust. Some of our most remarkable people, for example, our greatest military leader, Sir John Monash from Melbourne, was Jewish, and he was perhaps one of the best 2 or 3 generals in the First World War, and a very humane man who developed techniques for winning battles without losing lives. 2 of our Governor Generals, who both served with great distinction, have been Jewish. In every area of endeavour, the economy, arts, politics, treasury, they've made an enormous contribution. And yet here we were as a society arguing over whether the chants outside the Opera House were gas the Jews or where's the Jews. And there's really no difference. Anyone who knows anything about the history knows where's the Jews are the questions that the Nazis asked when they conquered a city and wanted to round up the Jews so they could take them to the gas chambers. There's no material difference. We don't seem to understand our history.
That's because history, the teaching of history in schools and through other channels like the media, through documentaries, all of that's been co-opted. It's been, your country, like many others, institutions have been infiltrated, especially those that are left-leaning. And the Islamists, in collusion with the Marxists and neo-Maoists, they have produced these where they hide behind criticizing Israel or criticizing Zionism or criticizing Bibi Netanyahu. But actually what they're peddling is just good old-fashioned anti-Semitism. And those institutions fell for it. And so now you have people in leadership places that either don't know the history of anti-Semitism, can't recognize it if it hits them in the head, and then are complacent or at times even complicit. And that's very shocking and it's horrifying. And it's going to take quite a bit of time for us to reverse this. And I hope we can.
Well, if we're going to reverse it, I think we have to be honest about what's happening. The first response here was, well, let's tighten our gun laws. Australia has some of the toughest gun laws in the world. Let's tighten our gun laws. That immediately offended many people who live in rural Australia because they said, well, why are we the target because we have guns as part of our business when we won't call out the people who did this? Radical Islamists. And it seems to me that actually, if we're really honest about it, this in the end turns out to be a theological problem. The problem's not guns. It's not even primarily, I would put it, that we ought to think about this anti-Semitism or radical Islam. It's actually a theological question that we have forgotten who we are. We've forgotten what our values are. We've created an unbelievable vacuum into which all sorts of sloppy thinking right through to, frankly, outright evil can flourish.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. It is not the guns because sometimes they use guns. It's not the cars because sometimes they use cars. It's not the knives. It's not the suicide vests. It's not the chemicals that they put together when they use improvised explosives. It's their theological conviction, and it is our theological convictions that they're opposed to. They're opposed to Judaism and want to wipe it off the earth. They want to follow up with Christianity. A lot of atheists think that they are the exception. They are not. And so we have to understand, precisely as you put it, that first and foremost, this is a spiritual confrontation. And because we created this huge vacuum, and we allowed, therefore, our cultural institutions to be infiltrated and occupied, that we find ourselves on the defensive in our own societies. I mean, I'm an immigrant, a very grateful immigrant, but I count myself as being a part of America, a part of the West. And of course, I am enjoying this Western heritage, so I want to defend it. But it's very difficult to get Westerners to wake up. 9/11, 2001, the US was hit with the terrorist attacks, the passenger planes. The response was military. And then when we found these terrorist attacks on our soils, the US, different parts of Europe, but also in Australia, again, the response was it was military, it was surveillance, it was intelligence, it was how do we prevent these plots from occurring? But there was this obstinacy, and it's still there, to recognize that the problem is rooted in Islam. Islamism is a product of Islam, and this political ideology and the intentions they have and the conviction that they must conquer, the conviction that they must destroy Jews, these are things that they spell out. They say this to their congregations and the infrastructure of mosques and youth camps and Muslim centers that they have built, and then they act on it. And every time we see a terrorist action like Bondi Beach, we get horrified, we pretend we are surprised, and then we go back to that interfaith dialogue where those who are representing the West can't even articulate what their faith is.
Exactly. Now, the last time you and I were together with a group of people, we were talking about the many strains of Islamic belief and also of commitment. And I recounted the story of how just that morning in London, on a long drive in an Uber, I'd had a Pakistani driver, very friendly man, very warm man. We had a great conversation. But part of our conversation centered on his beliefs. And he said, my wife and I, we're Muslims, but we do not take it seriously. We never go to prayers. But, he said, I have 4 children and they go to school and they come home insisting on what is right and what is wrong. I didn't quite know how to pursue it, but he was plainly telling me that he and his wife were probably lukewarm on anything religious, as so many Britons are, but his children were not. They were taking their Islamic faith very seriously. This raises this question, I think, doesn't it, that people are determined to draw a distinction between what they call moderate Islam, which they say is harmless and peaceful, and extremist Islam, which everyone agrees is very dangerous. But whilst there's some truth to it, I suspect that it's not as simple as saying that Islam is a religion of peace. For a start, it is, I think, instinctively anti-Semitic.
Islam is not a religion of peace. Islam is a religion of conquest. So Muhammad was first and foremost and is remembered as a conqueror. He's the one who not only brought, by his own account in his biography, he says God spoke to him through the angel Jibril or Gabriel. And in Mecca, he convinced his wife, he convinced his best friend, and over a decade, through the method of simply speaking and trying to persuade without any violence, he had gained a following of about 200 people over a decade. Then he went to Medina, established a militia, and went back to conquer, to attack Mecca, the Meccans who had rejected his message. And he was very successful. And from there, for Islam, things went almost worldwide. Islam became an empire that fell only in 1924. And so that's the story that the Islamists tell. The Islamists glorify Muhammad's conquests, and they want to continue those conquests. They glorify the treatment that Muhammad meted out to the Jews when he massacred them, and they want to repeat these things. When ISIS in 2014, 2015, when they conquered parts of Israel, parts of Syria and Iraq, and they started to do things that horrified us, like beheading people and enslaving Yazidi women, they were reenacting what they find in the biography of the Prophet Muhammad and in the Hadith and in the Quran. And so that's where things are at. And you can stick your head in the sand as long as you want. You can pretend you don't know this as long as you want, but that is a fact. That's the case. Now, having said all of this, there are millions of Muslims who are probably peaceful, like that Pakistani man. But when their children go to the mosque or the Muslim center or any kind of place where this Islamist ideology is being disseminated, the Islam they learn is the Islam of conquest.
There's another question, though, that I would like to just, before we leave what happened at Bondi, we have seen, a lot of writing about how this is not real Islam. This is only those who are radicalized. The Prime Minister has had immense difficulty even talking about radical Islam, which I think has cost him a great deal of sympathy in the Australian community, because everybody else can see we've got a problem with radical Islam. But a lot of the chants we've heard that reek of hatred are quite explicit in not just their anti-Semitism, but in their stated desire to destroy the state of Israel and to kill off Jews everywhere. Yet, and I saw a young lady do this the other day, what does Islam say about, and then they go to Dr. Google. So AI will tell you, if you ask, is it right for a Muslim to take a life, that it's absolutely wrong. Under no circumstances that Muslim faith says that it's completely inappropriate to take another life, except in limited circumstances of self-defense and so forth. But there's an interesting little hook in a lot of it. It's referring to the lives of the innocent. Is there a distinction between the innocent, and if so, who are the innocent and who are not the innocent? And is it all right to take the lives of the non-innocent?
The innocent are Muslims, fellow Muslims. So you're not allowed to take the life of the innocent, meaning those who are truly Muslim. And it's the same way the word peace is used in Islam. The assumption is peace is for those who've accepted Islam. And those who reject Islam, Jews, Christians, atheists, others, Hindus, Buddhists, whatever, if they reject Islam, then we're in a state of war with them. And they are not innocent, but they are those who've rejected. They're the enemy. And therefore, it's the obligation, it's the duty of the Muslim man to go after them and convince them. Try persuasive means first, and then use the ultimate persuasion, which is coercion, or face death. And if they are to face death, then kill them. That is what it means.
It's a little warning of the dangers of AI in a way, because unless you ask the right questions, you'll get very misleading information.
Well, a lot of these large language models have been trained on leftist and Islamist and other rubbish. And so that's also what they generate. And I like AI, but I like all kinds of technology. And I think that's something that can be corrected. And I know that there are some people who are trying to get to make these improvements.
We have seen in this country under the current government, and I shouldn't seek to involve you in a local political toing and froing, but since October 2023, as is widely known right over the world, Australia has moved its position on Israel enormously. There was almost no reaction to the outpouring of pro-Hamas activity on our streets. We've recognized Palestine. How you do that when a state doesn't exist, I don't know. It's technically not possible, but there's been, if you like, a constant repudiation of Israel. And people will always argue, oh, well, that's not anti-Semitic, it's anti-Israel. But 80% of Australian Jews are Zionists. They do believe, and I believe, in the state of Israel. So in that sense, if that makes me a Zionist, I'm a Zionist. This raises the question of the tone that is set and the license that is given by the way that national leaders behave.
Unfortunately, yes, because, again, I'm not really an expert in Australian politics, but I know that in some of these other Western countries, politicians, especially those on the center left, have come to depend on the Muslim vote as a bloc. And the Muslim vote as a bloc is organized by the Islamists, and in particular by various organizations that are affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists, they disseminate the most vile prejudice and hatred of Israel, Zionism, and Jews. And if you combine all of these things, you have to wonder, this leftist politician, is he truly anti-Semitic, or does he just want the vote? My conclusion for many years has been they just want the vote, and they think they can have the vote without any policy consequences. So they accept this block vote. This will get me into office. And then I can ignore the wishes of the Islamists who helped me get into office. Well, that's not how it works. The Islamist is going to come and demand that the Holocaust no longer be taught, that the foreign policy of your country towards Israel change. You may have heard of BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction, which is this so-called pro-Palestinian movement that is trying to delegitimize Israel in every way possible. Many demand that the Holocaust not be taught in schools, and just other active propaganda against Israel, against Zionism, against Jews. And so is that what's happening in Australia? Is your Prime Minister and the Labour Party in Australia, are they beholden to that Muslim ethnic vote or not? If not, another explanation might be there is just this large to the far left. This is where the Red-Green Alliance comes in, where there is this odd anti-Zionism. They say it's anti-Zionism, but it really boils down to antisemitism anyway, where again, Jews are demonized because in this decolonization narrative and multicultural narrative that they advance, they divide the world into oppressor and oppressed, and the oppressor is the white man, and they categorize Jews and Israelis as white, and the state of Israel as a settler colonial country that has to be removed. And so when you have these Islamists holding hands with the leftists, you're then left as a political leader on the moderate left, or not moderate, even far left, with policies, with a posture towards Israel that is very different from the traditional post-war posture that all Western countries had towards Israel, which was to defend the legitimacy of Israel as a state, the legitimacy of Zionism, and then within Western borders, the promise of never again, because of what had happened in the Holocaust, and the commitment to keep teaching young generations about the Holocaust so it's never repeated. All of that's repudiated by this unholy alliance between the left and Islamists.
The settler oppressor model intellectually holds no water at all, and I wonder how many academics can sleep with themselves at night when they advance it. The point one is, of course, that there were Jewish people long before there were Muslim people in that part of the Middle East, thousands of years ago. That's point one. They were deprived one way or another, forced out, persecuted. Secondly, have any group of people in the entire history of mankind been more oppressed than the Jewish people themselves? Have we really forgotten what they've been through and the horrors of the 20th century so quickly?
Well, the question you asked is a question for the education systems, right? It's an audit of what is going on in these schools, what's in the textbooks, what are children being taught, what's going on in the universities. We have ways and means of transmitting information and knowledge onto the next generations, and those channels have been corrupted. And so that's what kids are taught. They're not taught about. We started our conversation with, is the Bible even taught? So no one knows, very few people know anything about the Old Testament. That's where the place that we call Israel. And then there's Greater Israel, not this tiny narrow place, but Greater Israel, where the areas where the Jews lived for 2,000 years and more. Is that even taught? Even is the most recent history, just the history of the Second World War, is that taught beyond, only talking about Hitler? I mean, even the way these historical analogies are made today in America, Somalis of Minnesota are being held responsible for some of the fraud that they committed. And in response, they're saying, well, we're being treated like Jews in the 1930s. Really? Do you know anything about how the Jews were treated in the 1930s? Are you kidding me? So this perversion of history. This history the Western history has been made superficial, and then it's actively subverted. And that's what we have. I think that's the proper reckoning. That question you asked is probably the most important question. What's going on in our school systems?
If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this. You can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.